So last week, or 2 weeks ago, I missed last week. 2 weeks ago, I discussed the symptoms and risk factors for anemia. And as I discussed, many of those risk factors had to do with sex differences between males and females. And today, this week, I want to focus on why exactly females are more likely to have anemia and iron deficiency. Many of the reasons are obvious, some of them are less obvious. So, to start, let's start with the obvious ones. Uh, Beginning at puberty, menstruation, it causes a lot of blood loss. I was actually looking into the amount of this more recently, and it's really quite surprising, like how much you lose. I think like it was a couple tablespoons of blood can be, you know, like 30 servings of worth of red meat, something like that. So, if you're not eating a ton of red meat, it can really add up, right? So if you're and especially if you have heavy flow, then that's more blood loss. And I don't know how you girls are measuring it or anything, but if it's probably just an estimation. But you have to kind of be aware of that. Every tablespoon of blood loss ends up being a lot of iron that you're losing. Um, so, along those lines, another obvious one, but less common one, is pregnancy. When you are pregnant, your body has increased demands for blood volume. Uh, to support the growing fetus, you need a lot more oxygen and nutritional delivery to the fetus. So you increase blood volume, both in terms of plasma volume and in terms of red cell volume. Now, with pregnancy, it does appear that plasma volume increases more than red cell volume does. Whether or not that is because for whether or not that is like a normal healthy thing, or if it is because just many women don't have enough iron to produce enough red cell volume, so their plasma volume and their concentration ends up getting lower. I'm not sure, but you might not need to be as worried if your hemoglobin concentration goes down during pregnancy. It might go down a little bit just because plasma volume will increase more than red cell volume. Um, but with that in mind, you are more susceptible to iron deficiency and anemia because of the higher demands placed on you. And along those same lines, especially is the postpartum period. So often people are aware of postpartum depression or baby blues. Baby blues might affect about 70 to 80% of women after birth, where they feel like a mild depression and low mood, fatigue after birth. It's very, very common. And then maybe I'm just kind of remembering off the top of my head, I think it's about maybe a quarter or a third of all women after delivery experience postpartum depression, also very common. And this has to do with blood loss. I've explained this in other videos. The idea that it is caused by a drop in hormones just simply does not make sense. It is very simple. Women used to die because of blood loss uh, during childbirth. It If you die because of blood loss, right? If you it can kill you. So if you don't lose quite enough blood to die, you know you're probably going to have some problems. Depression is very understandable. If you lose a liter and a half, sometimes 2 liters of blood, it's a lot. And women who have more traumatic births, cesarean sections, where there is more blood loss, they have higher risk of postpartum depression and greater severity of symptoms. So blood loss, the higher demand during pregnancy can kind of increase the risk for being more iron deficient and anemic, but also the blood loss during delivery, sometimes prolonged blood loss afterwards, uh, definitely increases the risk for anemia and iron deficiency. Uh, Another common reason is that actually testosterone improves erythropoiesis. Erythropoiesis is red blood cell production. Now, so this is one of the reasons why you have this big disparity with children before puberty. They're both equally likely to be anemic, actually quite likely because they're growing so rapidly. But then at puberty, there's a huge difference. Females are far, far more likely to be anemic and iron deficient. Males, not so much. And one of these reasons might be that testosterone improves red blood cell production. Uh, Simply because you have lower levels of testosterone, you are somewhat more likely to not produce enough red blood cells. A fourth reason that is probably more sociocultural, and this has been demonstrated in the literature. There's actually a surprising number of studies on this, is that women just tend to prefer to eat less meat and specifically less red meat than men do. I don't know exactly why this is. I have my guesses. I imagine that red meat is seen as this more masculine thing, and is seen as less feminine. And so there's somewhat of an avoidance for it. I don't know. There could also be biological reasons for it. I do understand that women are more likely to have problems with their gallbladder and liver and bile production for digesting foods that are kind of really high in saturated fat, fatty foods. Those kind of like tough, uh, like protein and saturated fat rich foods can be tougher for women to digest, perhaps, or they are more likely to have digestive problems that make that so. But it might just be a social cultural thing that is just kind of viewed as a less feminine thing to eat red meat. But for whatever reason, women tend to eat less meat and less red meat than men do. I think this is a bit of a shame because for reasons that I've gone over, women need it a lot more than men do. They simply do. They just have higher demands for iron and all of the vitamins and minerals needed for red blood cell production because they're losing blood every month, right? It's very simple. They have much higher demands. So you put all of this together, and it's very easy to understand why women experience anemia and iron deficiency at a much, much higher rate than men do. Uh, you combine this with the fact that rapid growth and development increases the risk for iron deficiency and anemia. And it's easy to understand why teenage females in particular are perhaps the most susceptible people on the planet to anemia and iron deficiency, right? So children of both sexes are very likely to be anemic because they're growing so rapidly. And then women are very likely to be anemic because of all the reasons that we just went over. And then you get teenage females mixed in there. And it's just kind of the perfect storm for iron deficiency and anemia. It's incredibly common. If you know teenage females who are pale and fatigued and depressed, anxious, bruising easily, maybe their hair is not growing as healthy as it should be, and they're not eating enough red meat, you might you might want to remind them of how common iron deficiency and anemia is in their demographic, and maybe encourage them to seek help for their anemia and iron deficiency, or you might be in that boat yourself. So it's good to understand these risk factors, why exactly you as a woman might be more likely to be anemic and iron deficient. Um, and yeah, I don't think I have too much more. I think I hit all of the main points for why women are more likely to have anemia. So unless there are any questions from the chat, then I'll leave it at that. I discuss a lot of the science and many of the uh, risk factors that I just discussed on anemia and iron deficiency. I discussed that in the context of how anemia, a lack of blood, which ultimately means a lack of oxygen, leads to mental illness because the brain, it needs a tremendous amount of oxygen, right? And if it's not getting enough oxygen, then it won't function properly. And that is exactly what mental illness is. It is the brain not functioning properly chronically all of the time. It's not functioning properly. And I believe that the uh, it's a very, very common reason for why people have mental illness, and it is completely ignored for the most part, is anemia. Um, uh, it's just a no-brainer. If you don't have enough blood to deliver enough oxygen to your brain, it's gonna cause mental illnesses. So I wrote about that in my book. It's titled Beyond the Pale: Anemia, the Visible Yet Unseen Cause of Mental Illness and Gender Dysphoria, and I discuss that in depth. These issues, I think they're really important. People talk about women's issues and how they are more susceptible to certain health problems. Women are more likely to suffer with depression, anxiety, somatic symptom disorders. They're more likely to appear pallid, pale, anemic. They're more likely to bruise. They're more likely to have sleep difficulties, more likely to have cold hands and feet, cold extremities, to feel cold all the time, to be fatigued, right? These are really, really important issues that a lot of people suffer from. Um, and nobody is talking about this. It's a very, I don't know why, because people like to talk about women's issues and it's important, but they don't talk about what actually is the problem. And the biggest obvious problem between difference between males and females is that females are much more likely to suffer from a lack of blood, and blood is incredibly important. Obviously, it delivers oxygen to all of your tissues. It's needed. Somebody in the chat just asked, is red meat, would it be helpful or beneficial for someone with Alzheimer's? Do I think so? I don't know. I don't have any experience with it, and I haven't studied it. So with Alzheimer's, their brain is in decline, their brain function. It's very much in decline. People have talked about Alzheimer's and dementia in terms of a kind of like a diabetes of the brain where it's not responding properly to blood glucose and insulin. And there does seem to be some truth to that with people going on ketogenic diets or supplementing ketones and seeing at least temporary, if not long-term improvement in their symptoms. Their brain kind of seems to come back to life a little bit. Um, but I mean, I don't think it would hurt. I that Another thing that I haven't really discussed much at all is that the elderly are one of the most hard hit demographics for anemia. It's very common as you get older, your body just gets it just stops being so good at dividing cells and to produce red blood cells. So 4 out of every 5 of your cells are red blood cells. You're constantly producing, these red blood cells in your bone marrow, and as we get older, our cellular division, it just gets crappy. And so, people, as they get older, they're less able to produce enough red blood cells, and then their blood volume lowers, and I mean, I talk about this a lot. If your red blood cell volume lowers, then the concentration changes. But if your plasma volume also lowers in response to the red blood cells lowering, then the concentration will stay the same. And if you get a blood test, it'll say that you're not anemic because the concentration is normal, but your total blood volume has gone down a lot. So I imagine there are a lot of elderly in that situation. But they're just, you don't see a lot of elderly with, great vasculature. You don't see them with their veins filled with blood, right? You see their veins quite stagnant with poor blood flow, but you don't, they're not very well perfused, right? So that can be a really big problem, just producing enough red blood cells. I think that's kind of the ultimate problem to health. If you can't produce enough red blood cells, you don't have them to deliver oxygen. You don't have enough oxygen to deliver to all of your tissues. Your tissues don't function properly because your tissues need oxygen to function properly. So in that respect, I imagine it would help whatever you can do to improve their red blood cell production by just getting them tons of iron, tons of B12, and the cholesterol, the amino acids, the lipids needed for red blood cell production. But I don't know anything. I don't know much in particular about Alzheimer's and how it's related to anemia, unfortunately. Thank you for the question. I hope whoever you're asking for gets some help with it. I know it's a very challenging disorder. Uh, if there's any other questions, I'll answer them now. But if not, we'll call it quits there. Next week, I want to talk more about that issue with how anemia is measured. It's measured, the way that it's measured is totally wrong. It's very simple. It's based on concentration, but it should be based on absolute amount. And so I'll talk about that next week. Thanks for tuning in. Carmen, thank you for your question. And I'll see you next week, Wednesday, 3:30.